When Borderlands came out, it boasted about having literally millions of guns. In reality, 99% of them are procedurally generated weapons with kind of minor variations. But meanwhile, when I play Enter the Gungeon, a game with hundreds of guns, not millions, I'm always discovering something that I've never seen before. Each gun could not be more different, and they all essentially represent their own distinct playstyle. They're bursting with imagination and diversity, which is important because they represent such a big part of the heart of Enter the Gungeon. There's a bow that mind controls enemies, there's a gun that streams like a homing laser, like a proton pack almost. There is a water pistol, there's a microtransaction gun that fires your currency instead of consuming bullets. They not only feel fresh, they have this sense of humor about them, and that sense of humor and diversity continues on with the enemy design, and these fabulously punny bosses like the Cannonball Rog, and the bullets firing guns that fire bullets in this endless recursive loop. Plus, I really like the feeling of threading needles in bullet hell games, and Gungeon is a very literal bullet hell. Enter the Gungeon is a fantastic roguelike with a delightful sense of humor. Dark Souls 3 might very well be the series' swan song, or at least the last Souls game for a while under Miyazaki's guidance. But if it is, then it's gonna go out on a high note, because Dark Souls 3 features the series' most involved, breathtaking boss fights, and its greatest menagerie of grotesqueries. The scenery is as beautifully macabre as ever, and From has really become adept at creating moments that pop. From the swirling maelstrom of clouds in Archdragon Peak and the confrontation with the Nameless King, to the moment of realization halfway through the final boss, to finding the untended graves, to discovering Yorm's gimmick, and the character who joins you for that fight, the huge callback after Pontiff Sullivan. All of this stuff is a treat to discover, and that sense of discovery that Souls games provide is one of the biggest draws for me. And Dark Souls 3 felt like it was always trying to satisfy my curiosity. From moment one, Inside presents a captivating mystery, and once you think you've made sense of things, it has this habit of upending whatever you thought you understood. Something that Playdead does better than perhaps anyone else is craft thoughtful narratives that are communicated almost entirely incidentally through the environment. With the stark environments comes an atmosphere so thick that you could choke on it. As you progress, you're greeted with one of the most perfect puzzle difficulty curves that I have ever seen. And then you get to the body horror and all of the brilliant set pieces, and holy shit, what a treasure this one is. Playdead is so good at doing a lot with so little, and the last 15 minutes of the game, I almost can't find the words. So instead, I'll just say that you really need to play Inside. And Limbo if you haven't played that, and really everything else that Playdead does from now until the end of time. Something like halfway through my first playthrough of the original Dishonored, I got so excited about the prospect of what things that I could experiment with on the next playthrough. Dishonored 2 introduces an extra character to the mix, and in doing so, I found myself planning what I would do for not just playthrough number 2, but 3 and 4 as well. Dishonored is not just a stealth game to me, it's kind of a creative playground, a sandbox that begs you to use all of your abilities to set up cool takedowns. While Corvo retains most of his kit from Dishonored 1, Emily is introduced in this game, and she comes with a brand new suite of powers and gadgets. One of my favorite new additions is Domino, that links people together, so whatever happens to one happens to the rest of them as well. Like if you decapitate one of them, all of their heads fly off. It is by far her coolest ability. Your imagination is really your only limit, and because of all of that, plus the huge vertical levels and the beautiful watercolor art, Dishonored is one of my favorite stealth series, and Dishonored 2 is a fantastic sophomore installment. One of my favorite games of the year. Even though it's a shooter through and through, The gunplay is maybe the least remarkable main system of Titanfall 2. The real heart of the game, I feel, is in its wild mobility. Trying to bounce from wall to wall, double jumping, sliding, building speed to streak across the map like a lightning bolt. That's where half the fun is. But then trying to do all of that and still shoot accurately is what propels Titanfall 2 into the stratosphere. And then there's this other side to the game, where you get to call in and pilot this diverse cast of mechs. One that fires ignitable thermite, or one that uses a wild weasel missile barrage, or one that specializes in melee attacks and has a phase teleport to close distances. It is ecstasy distilled into a game. It even features a surprisingly excellent single-player campaign that's just teeming with these little pleasant surprises all throughout. Titanfall 2 is for this generation what the original Modern Warfare was for last generation. A brilliant evolution in the military shooter genre. Blizzard isn't really a studio of innovators. They take good ideas and they polish them and they keep polishing until they de facto own the genre that those ideas came from. Overwatch is another notch in the same belt that includes World of Warcraft, StarCraft, and Diablo. Since release, I have dumped countless hours into each hero, and there are a lot of them, and I've yet to find one that I really dislike. That's a hell of a feat. Every hero has a fresh design and a fantastic kit attached to them. There's very little multiplicity between the heroes, and yet they fit so well together. By drilling down and focusing on the kits, the overall package, you get to see so many unique interactions and come up with astoundingly cool plays, and just generally flex your knowledge of a huge cast and your creative muscles and do things that are really fun and satisfying, like booping people off of cliffs as Lucio using Mei's Ice Wall, not just to cut off escapees or split teams up, but to boost your whole team into some really surprising strategic places, or firing off Zarya's Graviton Surge into the well on Ilios and sucking the enemy team into their deaths. There's so many cool things to try out in Overwatch, and these big team-based combos as well. I absolutely adore it. Overwatch is an energetic shooter full of endless possibilities, and it also helps that I love the designs of all the heroes. It is an exceptional game. I was honestly a little bit nervous to put The Last Guardian into my PS4. Anticipation has been building for the better part of a decade, and with a track record like Ueda's, there's an expectation, an inherent expectation attached to The Last Guardian that it has to live up to. And thankfully it does. It really does. They actually did it. They distilled some of the best elements of Ico and Shadow of the Colossus into The Last Guardian. I'm not saying that it's better than Shadow of the Colossus, but what this game is beautiful and majestic and triumphant. The heart of the game, the heart and soul, is the relationship between your character and Trico. Trico's design and its behavior is meticulous, it's lavish, and that's all too necessary, because that's what kickstarts your bond. It really feels like an animal that you grow to care for very quickly. There's been criticism thrown The Last Guardian's way about how Trico doesn't behave properly and how it's frustrating to try to command, and it's not a wrong criticism, but you have to take the perspective that Trico is a wild animal and not a vehicle. Mechanically, he's a puzzle-solving tool, but if you were to boil The Last Guardian down to pure mechanics, you would do it at his service. It's rewarding, both ludically and emotionally, to take the patient approach and work with Trico instead of trying to fight how he behaves. Once you do, you can watch this beautiful companionship unfold and watch as it takes Trico and your character to jaw-dropping scenes where you can try to pick apart the atmosphere and the environments for clues as to what's bubbling under the surface. Team Ico very clearly wanted me to take a journey with a beloved pet, and they succeeded magnificently at endearing me to Trico and to the game. XCOM 2 pulls off a tremendous balancing act. On one hand, they do a great job of making you feel completely and utterly in charge. You are the most important person in the world, and yet you can sometimes feel completely and totally helpless. It makes you own your successes and your failures. But what a playthrough really comes down to is the ability to not become paralyzed by an overwhelming amount of options, and to make the best use of your limited resources, of which there are so many different types to consider. Time, for instance, is maybe the most important one. The weight of the advancing Alien Avatar project is bearing down on you all the time. You have individual missions that come with built-in turn limits, you're constantly being raided, you have dark events triggering difficulty modifiers around the globe on a reliable timer. You're always fighting the clock, and you keep just having to fight and buy yourself time, scratching and clawing to do so. It takes sometimes weeks for wounded soldiers to recover. Crossing from continent to continent takes time. Constructing facilities, sometimes mission-critical ones, and performing research takes time. Scanning for supplies takes time. So the question is, what are you going to dedicate yourself to? Can you cut corners without setting yourself up for failure? You're forced to play in an extremely calculated way. It makes you feel like you're constantly up against a wall. And that's without getting into the nitty-gritty of intel, of resources, of the black market, of staffing, of all of the things you could do back at base, the minutia of this amazing turn-based combat system, and the fact that if you lose a soldier, he is gone permanently. So the more powerful a soldier gets through experience and promotions, the riskier it is to send them out, because you might lose him or her and all of that time that you invested into them. It's great. It's great. XCOM 2 is complex, and it is completely absorbing. Darkest Dungeon is a game that's best played in inches. It's also the game that I've come back to most often throughout the year. How it works is you form a party of 4 from a variety of different classes, you supply them, you send them out into a dungeon to complete a quest, like, say, cleansing 3 holy relics. You fight some monsters with a really good turn-based combat system, by the way, and you find treasure, and you finish the quest, and then you send them back into town for some R&R, and you repeat. That's the loop. And it sounds simple, until you get to my favorite subsystem from Darkest Dungeon, which is stress. During a dungeon crawl, your party builds up stress, and when they hit a critical mass of stress, they develop an affliction or a virtue. And if they keep getting too stressed while out in a dungeon, they die of a heart attack, and they will get stressed. It's gonna happen. Darkest Dungeon's dungeons are full of insidious traps, eldritch abominations, vile monsters rendered in an arresting art style, and darkness, ever-present darkness that you can only ward away by keeping your torch blazing. And all throughout, you have this gravelly-voiced narrator waxing poetic about how utterly gloomy everything is. It's enough to drive a hero mad. You might be wondering what some of those afflictions are, too. Well, one of them is paranoia, which causes them to stress everybody else in your party out, flee from their rank in their formation, and they can refuse to be healed because they don't trust your healers sometimes. And that's a couple in a long list of effects. Yeah, when shit hits the fan and Carl the paranoid leper is on death's door refusing to take heals, it's a bad, bad time. And yet it's also so sadistically compelling. Your heroes also come with a bevy of quirks, some positive and some negative. Sometimes that means they're a known cheat and they can't gamble in town. Sometimes it means they're a kleptomaniac and they will steal dungeon treasure from you. And don't get me started on how some of the dungeon monsters give you diseases. But all of that stuff makes the other half of the game so important. The other half is going back to town. The town isn't just for recruiting new heroes when yours inevitably die off or run off in the middle of the night. It's not just for upgrading their equipment and buying relics. It's not just for the player decompressing between stressful missions. It's for keeping the stress levels of your heroes manageable. It's for curing diseases and removing detrimental quirks and afflictions. Even then, Your attempts to soothe them can have their own consequences. Maybe you send Carl the leper off to gamble his worries away, and he comes back addicted to gambling, so that's all he can do. Or maybe something good happens to you. Maybe you get a little bit of serendipity out of it, and he strikes it rich. Or maybe you send Carl off to chill at the local brothel, and he comes back with syphilis. Again, these things happen. Darkest Dungeon is a potent, concentrated form of emergent gameplay that is impossible for me to turn down. Doom is not only my game of the year, but one of the most pleasant surprises that I've had all year. There was a mountain of red flags leading up to this game's release that it had to overcome, and it shattered all doubts in the opening minutes. You start with a line that lands just perfectly on the ears, short and sweet. You get into the game and you immediately and savagely murder a demon. You get your armor and you pick up the best shotgun Doom has ever had. Your character, the Doomslayer, tosses aside a monitor that would have otherwise slowed you down from your inevitable rampage with expository dialogue, and then you proceed to butcher an open arena full of demons in the most satisfying way possible. And in that arena, you find the tightest possible gameplay loop. One that does not wear thin and one that is infinitely satisfying. It's this perfect encapsulation of what this Doom is all about. It's a loving and brutal revival that understands what it's trying to be, what you want out of it, and where the series has gone astray in the past. To that end, every weapon is immediately satisfying. The upgrades and the modules fundamentally change how you play with them, which makes it feel worthwhile to pursue those upgrades, and the base speed that you move at even immediately just feels right. A big part of Doom is making sure that things feel good. Traversal, the sounds weapons make, how they look, how enemies react to getting hit by exploding into red mist and chunky viscera. Also, this right here, this gun, this beautiful piece of electromagnetic ballistic beauty. Doom's Railgun. I would marry this gun. I don't want to sell some of the subtle and actually quite impressive character building or world building or background lore or any of that stuff short. But here's the thing. While I do sometimes want more out of games, I want a more complex narrative, I want a wider emotional gradient, I want more textured stories with rich characters, or I want a complex gameplay loop with tons of emergent possibilities and all of this stuff. All of this is great, but variety is the spice of life, and what Doom does is focus down with laser intent on the gameplay, on the very fundamental aspect of that gameplay. And it is blissful stuff. It is the absolute best at what it does, and that is why Doom is my game of the year. Thanks for watching, everyone. 2016 was a fantastic year, at least for game releases, and really, this top 10, on any given day, you could shuffle the deck, and I would probably come up with a different game of the year. I feel like the margin was that razor thin. But the point is, check some of these games out if you haven't already, because they are all, in their own right, doing different things and succeeding brilliantly at what they do. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take it easy. Have a good one.